In the mist-covered valleys of a small island on the edge of Europe, a kingdom was forged that would eventually command the largest empire in human history. Knights and parliament, industry and empire, tea and trenches. These symbols define a nation that transitioned from a divided tribal land to a global superpower. This is the story of how a collection of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms survived Viking raids and Norman conquests to become the birthplace of the modern industrial world. Here are 1,000 years of English glory, conquest, and change in 20 minutes. The Norman conquest and the end of an era. The story of modern England truly begins in 1066. Before this, the land was a patchwork of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, constantly fighting off Viking invaders. When King Edward the Confessor died without an heir, a power vacuum triggered a violent struggle for the throne. This conflict ended at the Battle of Hastings, where William the Conqueror, the Duke of Normandy, defeated the last Anglo-Saxon king, Harold. This victory was far more than a simple change of kings. It was a total reset of English society. To secure his grip, William replaced the entire English nobility with French-speaking Normans and introduced a strict feudal system. Under this new order, every acre of land belonged to the king, granted only to those who swore absolute loyalty. To suppress rebellions, he built massive stone castles, such as the Tower of London, which acted as symbols of Norman psychological warfare. In 1086, William commissioned the Domesday Book, a giant census that recorded every cow, pig, and plot of land in the country. This allowed him to tax the nation with terrifying efficiency. The conquest also created a deep cultural divide. For centuries, the elite spoke French, while the commoners spoke Old English. Over time, these two tongues blended into the English language we speak today. The introduction of Norman influence also transformed architecture and law. Fine stone cathedrals replaced wooden churches, signaling a permanent shift toward continental European culture. By the time William's reign ended, the old Anglo-Saxon world was gone, replaced by a powerful, organized kingdom that would eventually become the foundation for a global empire. This Norman yoke fundamentally reshaped the English identity, linking the island's destiny to Europe for the next 1,000 years. The Plantagenets and the spirit of law. By the 1100s, the Norman dynasty evolved into the Plantagenets, a powerful line of kings who would rule for over 3 centuries. This era was defined by a constant, often violent struggle to balance the absolute power of the crown with the growing rights of the people. Henry II was the architect of this new age. He revolutionized England by creating a common law system. By sending royal judges across the land, he replaced a confusing mess of local customs with a unified legal structure that applied to everyone in the kingdom. However, the stability Henry built was nearly destroyed by his son, King John. John is remembered as one of history's great villains. Clever but cruel and deeply untrustworthy, he lost the family's ancestral lands in France and, in a desperate attempt to win them back, taxed his nobles to the breaking point. His reign was so disastrous that his fed-up barons finally revolted, cornering him in 1215 at a marshy meadow called Runnymede. There, they forced the king to attach his seal to the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. This was a revolutionary moment in human history. For the first time, it was officially written down that the king was not an absolute godlike figure. He was subject to the law just like anyone else. The charter established crucial principles. It protected the right to a fair trial and prevented the king from seizing money without the consent of a council. While it mostly helped wealthy nobles at the time, it planted the seeds for the British Parliament and the modern idea of constitutional democracy. The Magna Carta turned the divine right of kings into a thing of the past and laid the foundation for the liberties we enjoy today. The Black Death and a new economy. The 14th century brought a horror that changed the world forever. The Black Death. Arriving on English shores in 1348, this bubonic plague swept through villages and crowded cities alike, wiping out nearly half of the entire population. It was a human tragedy of unimaginable scale. Yet, amidst the grief, the plague accidentally shattered the old social order and birthed a new world. Before the plague, England was built on serfdom, a system where peasants were essentially tied to the land, working for their lords in exchange for protection. However, with half the workforce dead, labor became incredibly scarce. Suddenly, the surviving peasants realized they held something they had never possessed before: bargaining power. For the first time, they could demand higher wages or leave their manors to find better work elsewhere. The ruling elite tried to fight back. The government passed laws to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and eventually introduced a hated poll tax to fund foreign wars. In 1381, the people finally snapped. Led by figures like Wat Tyler, the Peasants' Revolt saw thousands of angry laborers march on London, burning palaces and demanding an end to serfdom. Although the revolt was eventually crushed and its leaders executed, the genie was out of the bottle. The old system was broken. Lords found it impossible to force people back into traditional bondage. Over the next century, serfdom quietly died out, replaced by a system of paid labor and land leases. From the ashes of the plague, a new middle class of independent farmers and traders began to emerge. This shift didn't just change the economy, it changed the face of English society forever, setting the stage for the rise of a more mobile and modern nation. The Tudors, a golden age of power. The 1500s were dominated by the Tudor dynasty, a family that transformed England from a medieval backwater into a centralized modern state. The era's most towering figure was Henry VIII. While he is legendary for his 6 wives, his most radical act was the English Reformation. By breaking away from the Catholic Church in Rome and declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England, Henry didn't just change how people prayed. He seized absolute power. He dissolved hundreds of monasteries, funneling their massive wealth and land directly into the crown's pockets, forever weakening the influence of the Pope on English soil. The Tudor era reached its zenith under Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I. Known as the Virgin Queen, she navigated a world of religious tension and foreign threats to oversee a golden age. Under her leadership, England emerged as a formidable maritime power. The defining moment of her reign came in 1588, when the Spanish Armada, an invincible fleet sent by King Philip II to conquer England, was decimated. A combination of agile English fire ships and a devastating Protestant wind, a lucky storm, scattered the Spanish ships. This military victory gave England the supreme confidence to begin its first colonial ventures across the Atlantic. But the era wasn't just defined by cannons and ships, it was a revolution of the mind. This was the age of William Shakespeare, whose plays and sonnets helped standardize the English language and gave voice to a rising sense of national pride. By the time the last Tudor monarch died, England was no longer just an island. It was a rising intellectual and naval power ready to claim the world stage. The Stuarts and the fight for the crown. The 17th century was a bloody tug-of-war between the king and parliament that reshaped the nature of power forever. At the center of the storm were the Stuart kings, specifically Charles I, who firmly believed in the divine right of kings. To Charles, his authority was granted by God, meaning he had no obligation to answer to any earthly power. Parliament, however, controlled the nation's purse strings and insisted that the king could not raise taxes or pass laws without their consent. This political deadlock eventually exploded into the English Civil War, 1642 to 1651. It was a brutal conflict that pitted the Cavaliers, Royalists, against the Roundheads, parliamentarians, tearing through the country and dividing families, neighbors, and cities. The war ended with an event that shocked the world: the public execution of King Charles I in 1649. For the first time in history, a reigning monarch was legally tried and executed by his own people for treason. For the next 11 years, England experimented with being a republic known as the Commonwealth. It was ruled by the stern Puritan leader Oliver Cromwell, who eventually took the title of Lord Protector and ruled with near military control. While the monarchy was eventually invited back in 1660, an event known as the Restoration, the old days of absolute power were gone. The final nail in the coffin for royal absolutism came with the Glorious Revolution of 1688. King James II, was ousted in a bloodless coup, and the new monarchs, William and Mary, were forced to accept the Bill of Rights in 1689. This landmark document ensured that no king could ever rule again without the consent of Parliament. It secured free elections and freedom of speech within the legislature, turning England into a constitutional monarchy and providing the blueprint for modern democracies worldwide. The Industrial Revolution, global transformation. In the mid-1700s, a transformation began in the north of England that would fundamentally rewrite human history, the Industrial Revolution. This wasn't just a change in business, it was a shift in how humanity lived. Fueled by massive deposits of coal and iron, and propelled by groundbreaking inventions like James Watt's steam engine, England transitioned from a quiet world of hand-plowed farms to a roaring world of steam-powered factories. Towns that were once small villages, like Manchester and Birmingham, exploded into massive industrial hubs almost overnight. As the enclosure of farmland pushed people off the soil, thousands flocked to these cities in search of work. To fuel this growth, a massive network of canals and eventually railways, the Iron Horse, crisscrossed the countryside, moving goods and people at speeds never before imagined. This immense productivity earned England the title of the workshop of the world. However, this spectacular progress came with a staggering human cost. The factory system was built on dark, satanic mills, where workers, including children as young as 6, labored for 14 hours a day in deafening, dangerous conditions. The air in industrial cities became thick with coal smoke, and families were crammed into unsanitary, disease-ridden slums. This era created our modern world of mass production and global trade, but it also sparked a fierce internal struggle. The misery of the working class led to the birth of trade unions and the long, difficult fight for workers' rights, the 8-hour workday, and public health laws. The Industrial Revolution proved that while technology could generate incredible wealth, it required a new set of social rules to ensure that the people powering the machines weren't destroyed by them. This era remains the blueprint for the modern economic and social landscape we inhabit today. The Victorian Empire, a world power. During the 1800s, under the long and steady reign of Queen Victoria, England became the heart of the largest empire the world had ever seen. At its peak, the British Empire covered a quarter of the Earth's land and governed nearly 1/5 of its population. From the vast plains of Canada and the outback of Australia to the bustling markets of India and large swathes of Africa, British influence was so widespread that it was famously said, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." This era, known as the Pax Britannica, was fueled by the supreme power of the Royal Navy. By controlling the world's major oceans and trade routes, England ensured that goods like tea, cotton, silk, and spices flowed constantly into its ports. This was a time of immense national confidence and jingoism, where British culture, language, and technology were exported to every corner of the globe. However, the legacy of the Victorian Empire is deeply complex and controversial. On one hand, the British introduced massive infrastructure projects, building thousands of miles of railways and telegraph lines that modernized communication and transport in their colonies. They also exported the English common law system, which remains the foundation of many modern legal systems today. On the other hand, this global dominance was built on extraction and suppression. The wealth that funded the grand, ornate marble architecture of London was often taken from the natural resources of colonized lands. Native cultures were frequently sidelined or dismantled, and millions of people lived under a system that prioritized British interests over local freedom. While the Victorian era was a golden age of prosperity for the English middle class, it left a legacy of inequality and struggle across the globe that still shapes international relations in the 21st century. The World Wars and the loss of empire. The 20th century brought the most testing time in English history. In World War I, an entire generation of young men was lost in the mud and trenches of France and Belgium. Just 20 years later, World War II saw England standing almost alone against the might of Nazi Germany. During the Blitz, English cities were bombed nightly. but the defiant leadership of Winston Churchill and the Blitz spirit of the people kept the country fighting until victory. England emerged from the war victorious, but financially broken. The empire was no longer sustainable. Over the next few decades, major colonies like India and nations across Africa gained their independence. England had to reinvent itself from a global conqueror to a modern European nation. This era also saw the creation of the National Health Service, NHS, and the welfare state, a promise that the government would look after its citizens from the cradle to the grave. Modern England, a global cultural leader. In the 1960s, England found a new way to influence the world. Soft power. Bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones led a British invasion of the global music charts, while London became the fashion capital of the world. English film, television, and sports, especially the massive global popularity of the Premier League, became the country's new and most successful exports. Today, England is a diverse, multicultural society that continues to balance its ancient traditions with a fast-moving modern world. While it has navigated major changes like leaving the European Union, Brexit, its influence remains massive. London is a global financial hub, and the English language is the world's primary bridge for business, science, and the internet. The road ahead. 1,000 years later, the story of England is a story of constant evolution. It is a nation that has moved from the sword to the steam engine, and from a global empire to a digital leader. It began as a divided island of tribes and grew into a force that shaped the laws, language, and technology of the entire planet. As we look at the ancient stones of Stonehenge and the glass skyscrapers that now dominate the London skyline, we see a country that is deeply proud of its long history, but is always looking for a new way to shape the future. The 1,000-year journey of England is far from over. It is simply entering its next chapter in an ever-changing world.